The it's the soundtrack from 2001, A Space Odyssey. We are we live, Alex?
That's really good. Keep kind of just like
Buffering, chatting back and forth.
That's good.
Who does the voice of Hal?
Well, your voice naturally sounds like Hal, so I don't know if you know that, but
Very well.
that's what everyone says. Change Everything Live with your host Andrae Bailey back again. Nick, we made it one more week. You believe that?
Yeah.
It's unfortunate, but we did. We made it one more week. Change Everything Live. I'm Andrae Bailey. I'm the host of the show. I'm here today with Nick Henry, someone I've known quite a long time, who is a part of the Change Everything team and someone who's going to be a regular contributor to the show and putting content out online. As always, if you're checking us out on CBS, you can also watch the entirety of this show on Apple iTunes or on YouTube. Nick, now they have this fancy thing called the internet. You can go and rewatch things without needing a television.
Yeah, I've
But
heard of it.
I know. So again, if you want to watch the entirety of our interview, Nick and I are going to pontificate for longer than 30 minutes, but you can watch the entire show on YouTube and check it out on Apple iTunes and where else our content is made available. Nick, what's going on in your world, man? How you doing?
Good.
So you recently, I'm not someone who plays golf. I'm not really a golfer. I don't really have the patience for golf.
Mm-hmm.
And what makes you love golf? Why do you play golf?
Oh, wow. Good question. It's been called by sports experts the second most difficult sport in the world, and I believe it. I've done it on and off since I was a teenager. But it is, I think it's because it can be both a team sport and an individual sport. You can do it either way. And it is so incredibly challenging. It's an extremely tough mental game, but you also have to learn to execute physical tasks, I guess you could call them, with incredible expertise. There's very little room for error in golf. So to me, it's a good way to get outside, relax, but also at the same time, you have something to occupy your mind that is just incredibly challenging.
You told me recently a story about playing golf with, I think you said it was a 13-year-old boy.
Yeah.
And you guys were playing a semi-professional, professional course. Talk a little bit about that. That was, you got showed up by someone who was barely out of middle school?
Yeah, well, that's not unusual in golf. It's anybody that's watching this show that knows golf will understand the relevance of playing Pinehurst number 2. It's one of the premier courses in the world, and I grew up in the region around Pinehurst, but was just never able to play that course because we didn't have the money when I was growing up to do that. So it had always been kind of a dream of mine, and I went this past year and spent 3 or 4 days at Pinehurst with my wife, played several of the courses. Some of them I was familiar with, but I had never played number 2. And so the day that I played, I had to book my tee time like about 4 months ahead, and I barely got a tee time. But they paired me with 3 other people, and 2 of them were a father and son. And he brought his son to play as a gift for his, I think it was his, I don't remember, 13th, 14th birthday. This kid was great, but that is not unusual today. A lot of parents are starting their children in golf when they are very tiny. Tiger Woods is an example. And they are coached by professionals, some of them, from very early on, and they learn the craft the right way.
Similar to our producer Alex, he was coached in the fine arts of lighting and sound and film when he was 3 years old. Is that correct, Alex? Okay, so very similar.
Yeah, but this kid, he didn't make many mistakes, and he brutalized me. That's for sure.
Yeah, golf's interesting. I'm not sure. Again, I've got enough obsessions in my life. I think adding golf is one of those games I know I would like, but it's it seems like it would be.
It's addictive.
It's addictive.
Yeah.
And
Let me tell you where it becomes addictive. You can go out and you can hit 1,000 golf balls, and it's the most frustrating thing in the world because you would probably have to swing 200 times before you actually connected with one and got it off the ground. But the first time you accidentally hit a golf ball the right way, you will never go home. You will never go home. You're
because you
hooked.
pulled it off. You pulled off.
When you feel that experience and see what the outcome of it,
that makes sense.
you will never go home. You will invest. You will sell the clothes off your back to buy golf clubs and invest in equipment, and you're hooked.
To experience something that hard that you, for a second, master.
Yeah.
The idea of mastery. I like it. So, Nick, I wanted to bring you on, talk a little bit about Hamilton today. We'll get into that subject. Hamilton fever. I'm catching on late. Did you guys hear about this Hamilton play? It's 2019, and this guy wrote this play, and it's cool, and it's got like rap music and history in it. I know you guys have never heard of Hamilton, so yeah. In Orlando, where we live, some people watching this outside of Orlando, Hamilton just came to town, and we had the premiere of Hamilton, and I saw it, and I thought it was very, very interesting. Now, one of the reasons Nick is always good conversation is because he is someone who likes to keep up with American history. He's a biblical theologian, so he can quote the Bible to us in Greek and Hebrew if that's applicable to the situation, and generally knowledgeable about most things out there. So, Nick, this was interesting because, and I know you've been reading up on this a little bit, a lot of folks saw Hamilton as someone who was the founding father that didn't get the attention or the accolades that some of the other founding fathers got. Not from the production that everyone knows Hamilton, but from your recollection, what about Hamilton made him special as one of our founding fathers?
First off, I'm not an expert on this by any means, but I have always
Nick, we're on
been,
TV. Fake like you're an expert.
okay. All right. But I have always been interested in American history because I think it's a fabulous journey that this country has made in a very short period of time. If you know anything about world history and the history of man and the evolution of culture, what has happened in this country in a relatively short time frame is just it's miraculous. I don't know any other term to use for it, but it's also been a very messy experience, filled with a lot of failures and a lot of experimentation that some of it worked, some of it did not work, a lot of clash of personalities and ideals, and just how we've been able to wade through that and get to where we are now, to me is just, I mean, think of it in these terms. When America became a nation, most people, to earn their living, took a wooden plow, and it was pulled by a horse or a mule or an ox or something, and they scratched a living out of the dirt, just like the generation before them and the generation before them and before them and before them and before them, as far back as you can find. But then in the 240 some years of American history, we've gotten to the point now where you can put all human knowledge on a tiny little piece of plastic and metal, and we can travel to the moon, and we can take pictures of galaxies light years away, and we can do robotic surgery. The surgeon can be in California and the patient can be in New York. And it's because this experiment has unleashed human creativity and ingenuity like nothing that's ever happened in the world. So I'm fascinated by how we got here. We didn't just snap our fingers and it appeared. It was a journey. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And I think the reason Hamilton, and again, I'm not an expert on him, but I do know some things about his life. I think one of the things that made him fascinating is that he he falls into that genre. He was a brilliant guy who was involved in a lot of different things. He was a military strategist. He gave birth to the Coast Guard. He created the Coast Guard.
Wow.
But
I didn't know that.
But he also created the financial institutions that we still have today. He was a signer of the Constitution. So he was like a lot of the thing that fascinates me about the founders is how diverse they were. They could run a government and then go home like George Washington and run a farm and a winery. And they could write, they could speak. They were not ignorant people, self-taught, and yet they had a way of peering into the future and seeing farther into the future than I ever possibly could do.
Yeah, they seem like they had more of a Renaissance culture to them, the founding fathers, those in Hamilton's time. Even more than even some of their counterparts that came 2 or 3 generations later. Is that probably because that European heritage and legacy, a lot of them were kind of birthed in it because we were part of Britain then? Is that maybe why they, Thomas Jefferson spent a lot of time in Great Britain, in England, spent time in America? Were they American but also immersed in a culture in Europe that probably influenced that Renaissance side of them?
Yeah, I think it probably depended. The society back then was primarily divided between agrarian and I guess what you'd call city life. Mm-hmm. That would make the biggest distinction between people back in those days. But for those who were in the cities, and Hamilton would have been one of those people, they had access to a great deal of culture. And the educational system, it was not open to everybody like it is now, but it was excellent for those who could participate in it. A lot of people were self-taught. Of course, this came later, but a good example of that would be Abraham Lincoln, was completely self-taught. But yet, if you read the writings of these people, I can't understand half of what they write. It's above my head.
Yeah, it seems, and this just might be an impression I got, it seems that the founding fathers that lived at the time of the Revolutionary War and the beginning of our country, they seem more advanced than the leaders in America that followed them in Lincoln's time. Lincoln's time seems like our culture, I don't want to say it took a step backward, but it feels less European in America in 50 to 70 years after the founding of our nation than it did. And I guess that makes sense because we were 1 foot in Europe and 1 foot here in this new land. But so a lot of the Thomas Jeffersons, the Hamiltons, Benjamin Franklin, these were folks that probably art, culture, the great universities of Europe, that was all part of what they were experiencing on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Or at least it was something that was a part of their life in a way that was maybe cut off when we separated from Britain.
Yeah, and if you wanted to be anybody and achieve anything, those were the social groups in which you moved also. France also had a lot of influence in our country at that time. Benjamin Franklin spent a lot of time in France. So you're right. Those cultures had a great deal of impact on them, a great deal of influence on particularly the cities in the United States, or I guess we'd call them the colonies at that time, and put in people a desire to learn and to grow. Yeah.
Yeah, the cultural phenomenon that this Hamilton play has piqued my interest in that you can see how folks wonder about history, but it's almost like I've watched, when I was at the show, it seemed like people were watching the history unfold on that stage, and it was fairly accurate. But it was like, in a sense, it was entertaining, but it seemed like a different world. The America we live in today is a different world than the time of Hamilton and our founding fathers. What do you think the three biggest, if Hamilton was here today in 2019, what do you think the three biggest, what are the three things he would go, wow, that definitely worked just like, not just Hamilton, but the other founding fathers? What are the things that they would say, that worked like we thought it was going to work? And what are things you think they would go, wow, we didn't necessarily intend it to be that way? Now, this is a loaded question that is wrought with political peril. But in a broad sense, what do you think they would be surprised by, and what do you think they would go, yes, this is what we saw when we first put this country together?
All of them together, you're talking about?
Just in general. You had them in a room. They were chilling, hanging out, having tea and crumpets. And, what would surprise them about the America that is today versus where they thought it might be when they put it together? Because it felt like when they founded this country, they certainly did it hoping they were creating a new world for the long haul. That's the way it felt. And so what would surprise them, and what do you think they'd be very proud of worked just the way they thought?
Yeah. Well, obviously, I think the thing that would most, maybe not surprise them, but please them and amaze them, is how their experiment in self-government and building a country that was based on some unique things like private ownership of property and due process. These were non-existent in the world at that time. There was no model to follow. They put together a form of government that had never been created in human history. It was a piece of monarchy, it was a piece of oligarchy, and it was a piece of democracy. They took three models and took pieces from each of those three models and wove together what we have today in our three branches of government. And it was an experiment.
Who drove that? Who were the two or three people that probably drove that the most?
Hamilton was one that drove that strongly.
Okay. Because there had to be in the group of the founding fathers probably two or three of them that said, like you're doing right now, we need to go this way, and this way.
There were skeptics.
Okay.
And then, in fact, Hamilton was from the state of New York, where there were many skeptics. There were actually, each state sent a delegation to the Constitutional Convention, and in the New York delegation there were three, and Alexander Hamilton was one of those three. He was always outvoted. The other two would, and then that would be New York's vote. It was basically what he did not want,
Gotcha.
But he was a strong advocate from the beginning because he saw that what they had up until that time just was not working.
So what they had in England wasn't working.
That plus between the end of the Revolutionary War and the adoption of the Constitution in 1788.
Gotcha. The Constitutional Convention.
Yes.
Okay.
There had a loose form of a very weak federal government, and it was not working.
Yeah. So they'd be pleasantly surprised that this crazy idea worked.
It worked. It not only did it work, but look how we have flourished, how we have grown, and we've gone to all the way to the Pacific Ocean and beyond as a country. Our economy, don't hold me to this because I'm trying to remember it off the top of my head, but I believe the budget for the United States government the first year of George Washington's presidency was $3 million for the budget of the United States, if I remember correctly. We spend that much on toilet paper now for the offices.
Yes,
it's
probably more than that.
Probably, yeah. And these are the things that I think would amaze them. Plus, how far we have come scientifically and in those regards, you know, the technology we have, medicine, how far it has come. And it has come in large part due to the decisions they made in that room.
Pretty neat.
And you know, I had a tremendous experience as a young man a number of years ago. I guess I was in my 30s. I went to Philadelphia. I'd never been there. And I just drove in my car. I had no idea where I was going. I didn't have a map. Of course, we didn't have GPS at that time. I wanted to find the Liberty Bell and Independence Hall. I just wanted to spend a couple of hours looking at them. And I just kind of asked myself, driving through the interstate system there, where would this be? Because there were no signs pointing to it. And I figured, well, it's going to have to be in the middle of town because it would make sense to me that it grew out from there. So I just took a turn, went down into town, and bam, there it was. I drove right up to it. And I got out, and I spent some time there, and I took the tour. And I don't know if this was an accident or if it was okay, but when the tour went in that room where they had met and you know, honed out the Constitution, the tour left the room, and I got left behind. And I was in there by myself, and I didn't leave. Now,
That was where the Constitution
yeah, I don't
was
know if
created?
I was, yeah. I don't know if I was supposed to be in that room by myself, but I stayed in there. And I just sat, and I just thought, and I just looked. And, you know, the seat that George Washington sat in as the chairman or the president of that, not the country, but of that convention. It had the sun on the back of it, and all of that was in there. So I have a feeling I was not supposed to be in there by myself, but somehow I got left in there, and I just sat for the longest time until the next group came through, thinking about what they did in that room. And I think they would be utterly amazed at the fact that it has survived, thrived, grown. It's been tested, it's been half pulled apart, but somehow it has not just made it, it has become the place in the world where everybody wants to come.
And Nick, do you think that the birth of these great ideas that became a great nation was a lot of that because of what they experienced from a negative form of government through the king, through England at the time? Did these great ideas come more from the adversity they kind of suffered as citizens of England at the time? Is that kind of was it experiencing that negativity that then led to we should do it this way because we've seen the wrong way for it to be done? I mean, or did they just come up with these concepts out of thin air? It seems like all of the negative experiences of working under the king and having to be unfairly taxed and to not have personal property rights that were legitimate and to not have a voice as a people, that shaped them to say, we're going to create something that will never allow that again. Who was the king at the time?
Well, there was, of course, more than one during the whole colonial period.
During the
but
Revolutionary
during the
War and
Revolution,
before.
King George.
So King George and those that came before him, you could say that they had the greatest impact on shaping America, in a sense, or one of the greatest impacts, because Hamilton and Washington and Jefferson and all the founding fathers, they looked at that as an example of what not to do in government, correct?
Yeah.
And they said, okay, if a king can take your property, then we should have laws that don't allow that to happen. If a king can then pass on his wealth, hold all the power, and just pass it on to his descendants, we need to make it to where a president, if we have that president, has limits of power. So was our government and those that shaped it, did they look at that king and create kind of a mirror opposite? Is that kind of what our government as it sits today and as it was created, was it made to be the antidote to what we saw in King George and others like him in England?
Perhaps partially, but I don't think completely. I think there were two major forces that contributed to the way they thought. And this goes back to a question you asked me a few minutes ago that I actually never answered about what they might be, what they might not like about what they see today. Is I think there were two primary things that shaped their perspective when they sat down to form a government. One was, you are right, the oppression that they felt from being controlled by an outside force that at times could be very oppressive. And that had a big impact on them. But the other thing that I think had is equal or a greater impact was the fact that the colonies were a unique culture. They were, yes, we spoke English as a language, and if you went into the city, it had a British flavor to it, but most of the colonies were agrarian. They were not cities. They were agrarian, and the way a lot of people came over here, I don't think most people know this, but they did not all get on ships, nice ships, with their white wigs and come over here in their beautiful attire and go to balls and banquets all the time. A large number, I can't say the majority, but a large number of people that came over here by selling themselves into indentured servitude. And for example, they might cut a deal where they would come over here and work for 7 years as an indentured servant. And at the end of, they would be fed and clothed and have a warm place to sleep, but they were basically slaves for 7 years.
And then they had their citizenship or rights after that.
Yeah, then they could be released, but when they were on their own. You were on your own, dude. If you got sick, you died. And if you couldn't make it, you starved to death. It was a wilderness with a few cities. It was a wilderness, and you had to make it yourself. With your two hands and your brain, you had to make it, and you had to take care of your family.
So indentured servitude was a big part of the migration of people from Europe.
Yes.
Okay.
And so I think that rugged individualism that was unique to this country, because it was necessary for survival, coupled with the oppression that they felt, the control that they felt from an outside force that knew little about real life over here, and the oppression that they felt from that. I think those were the two strong influences on them as they sat down to develop a government.
Yeah, HBO has a special, they put a special series together on the life of John Adams. Now, John Adams was the second president?
Yes,
and
the first vice president.
First vice president, second president. So they had a mini-series on John Adams, and John Adams, fascinating the way they portrayed him. They portrayed his presidency as not very successful, and but him being a very thoughtful part of our founders and our history. But there's a conversation in the White House at the time. I'm not sure if they called it that, but it was the White House. And John Adams is there. Thomas Jefferson is there. Hamilton is there. And Hamilton proposes his central bank that became now the backbone of our financial institutions here in America. And Thomas Jefferson is just so offended by this idea. Thomas Jefferson's like, listen, oh, I see now. We're going to create a way for...
We're going right back where we came from.
That's exactly what he said. We're going right back where he came from, giving the government power. And now all you folks in New York are going to have all the money and be able to hold it over us in the states and in our as private citizens. So it was amazing to see, and this was taken from a actual transcript of a conversation that history says that Jefferson and Hamilton had and John Adams had. But to your point, they were ferocious about, they had come from a place where they had very few individual rights. The government had all the power. The government had all the money, which gave them power, and that power was passed on through birth to the chosen few that could exert that power, and the king and his descendants ruled over a ruling class that others at the bottom had no opportunity to be a part of. And so to your point, that America was the opposite of that. It was, come on over here, however you could get here, and then you were on your own. You had to figure it out. But Thomas Jefferson, he wanted to make sure that our government, almost in a way, more than anything, preserved that separation. And so I think, and again, this is where people often get political, and I think that's unfortunate because I think it's part of our culture and our history. What made America great? Are you still allowed to say that? Are you allowed to say "making America great"? Or is that? All right, sorry, we'll have to edit that out. But what ultimately made us the country one of the most successful, if not the most successful, experiments as a country in the history of humans? What made us great was this balance between a strong government. We had, Hamilton saw the need to have money so that we could finance a government that had some kind of strength, that could have a military, that could loan money and could borrow money, that had infrastructure. We had to have infrastructure. But more than anything, the counterbalance was this idea that as big as America could get, it still was about the individual. Individualism and the idea that indentured servant or that person who came over on a ship, or that anyone, Hamilton, back to Hamilton, the story of Hamilton, if you watch the play, is this orphan kid who works hard and is smart, and as an individual had the ability through hard work, dedication, passion, through ups and downs, mistakes and failures, to help shape a nation. But that kind of was the essence of what our founders were hoping for, a country where the individual could flourish, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and that is my whole premise, is that when you have that, you unleash potential, because when you can be rewarded for what you produce with your hands, with your labor, with your mind, you can own that, and you can profit from it, and you can pass it on to whomever you choose, not who someone else chooses for you. That is what unleashed. That's my premise. That's how we went from wooden plows to spacecraft in 200 years. When you take that away, and I think the rest of the world, a lot of the rest of the world, is proof of this. When you take that away from people and you diminish that creativity and that ingenuity, you stifle growth in every area, not just in individual areas, but also in medicine and technology and science and all of these things, because the rewards for your labor are no longer there. So that was a foundational premise for what they were doing. They did not want to build something and see a monarch thousands of miles away snatch it away because they had no rights to it.
Yeah, it's interesting. You got to go see Hamilton. I'd love to see your opinions of
I need to see
the founding fathers doing rap songs. That would be.
Well, I thought they did. And didn't they really do that?
Yeah, absolutely. Rap. The Sugar Hill Gang was a big part of our founding fathers. Whoa, that's interesting. So I think that's your computer, bud. No? Turn that volume all the way down. So Nick, let's do something fun here. We're going to don't look over there yet.
Oh, okay.
So a lot of people don't know this about Nick Henry. I've known Nick a long time. Nick is, I want to come up with a word for him to describe this, but Nick is someone who, he's experienced a lot of life. He's Nick, talk a little bit about your education. What degrees do you hold, and where did you get them from?
Oh, wow. My education was a lot like the American experiment. It's been messy.
Okay.
I started out in 1970 at the University of North Carolina, and I transferred from there to a Bible college to study for ministry.
Okay.
It's Southeastern University here in the state of Florida. It was the first time I ever went to Florida, actually. And then after that, I would go back and forth between University of North Carolina and Southeastern, summer school, fall, the spring semester. I would just go back and forth until I pieced together enough credits to get my degree.
Okay.
Eventually then went back years later in the 80s to the University of North Carolina, and was also accepted in a joint program with Duke University to work on my master's degree, which I did in journalism. And then years later received an honorary doctorate from a seminary in the Midwest due to some writing I had done. That, of course, is not formal education, but it's a nice recognition.
Sure.
And so mine has been kind of pieced together over a long period of time, woven in with work. I'm happy the way it came out for me, because I think all of the various experiences coupled with the study, instead of just studying and then going to work, has been good for me as a person.
At one time, you wanted to be a journalist?
No, I don't think I ever wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to learn how, at that time I was an ordained minister. I was building a church, and I loved writing, so I was right there near the University of North Carolina again. I just happened to end up back there and decided that I wanted to take my spare time and work on a master's degree, and I wanted to learn to write. So I ended up going to journalism school, which broadened me a lot because it was about a lot more than just writing. You had to learn about the newspaper and publishing industries. You had to learn about the legal aspects of publishing, libel, slander, invasion of privacy, the Freedom of Information Act, a lot of the conflicts that we have in our society because of our freedom of speech. For example, the conflict between a right to a fair trial, but yet the right of a free press to cover that trial can create some interesting conflicts. And so these sorts of things I had to study. It broadened me a lot. And then from that point forward, I have had an interesting journey with no mentor to guide me, so I've made a lot of mistakes along the way, but with no mentor to guide or advise me, I've tried to figure out how to weave those two different loves of my life together. At times I've done more of this, at times I've done more of that, at times I've found a beautiful harmony between the two, but it has been an interesting journey.
When I think, Nick, about your personal journey and the journey of your family, as the world has become more and more connected to social media and consumption of television, and that's a big part of our culture, you seem to be someone who has kind of shied away from that. Is that a fair way of putting it? So Nick, we like to ask Nick his thoughts on many current events at times, because Nick, you do not have any social media, correct?
No.
So, and that's a very light way of me. That's a soft way of me saying, Nick, you don't have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram.
No, I don't live in the 21st century.
Okay.
That's for sure.
And so I want to clarify, it's not that Nick doesn't use these platforms. You don't even access them. You don't even have you might not even know fully what they are if I were to test you on them.
True.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Nick knows absolutely nothing about social media, has no connectivity. I remember sending Nick a Facebook clip a few months ago, and he had to create an account to watch the clip because he had never gone on Facebook, which I actually think is, as I'm 42, as I've gotten a little bit older, I really get it, man. I tell you, I think I've seen the world change since in the last 20 years, really in the 90s to now, in a way that it's radically different. It's radically different how we live together, how we work together, how we play together. And technology and social media has driven that change. And I think a lot of that change has been positive, but I think a lot of it also has been negative. I think social media and technology and the connectivity that we now have to information, the connectivity that we have to each other, I think it's a powerful, powerful force that often we don't see as powerful, and that has unforeseen consequences that also I think we're only beginning to understand. You know, when I was a teenager, when I was growing up, when I was getting out of high school, going to college, I mean, you watch television. You know, you might watch MTV. You might watch. You know, this is the beginning of cable news networks, and so you had a lot of information, but that information you had to access purposely. You had to go and seek out content or voices in your life. You had to seek information. And now, if you think about it, Nick, information seeks you out. The integration of technology, our phones, our televisions now with all of the media, the traditional media, as well as new social media, information has never been more prolific, and it's never been more. It's never been distributed in the way it's distributed now. I think of it as the difference between being someone taking a little squirt gun and squirting water on you, or someone taking a fireman's hose and turning that on full bore. Information and the connectivity that we experience to others in our society, I think it's, again, something like we've never seen before. And I think there's something about it that's incredibly unhealthy. I do. I think there's something incredibly unhealthy about the way that we have introduced, where it's not even like it's something that's optional for our lives anymore. It's like if I'm Andrae and I was growing up, getting out of high school today, what's taught to us, whether we see it or not, is that this is life. This is how you live your life. You wake up, your phone is next to the pillow on your bed, because you wouldn't want to get a text at 3:14 a.m. and miss that. So you gotta sleep. You have a pillow, and your iPhone has a pillow, right? And so your phone is with you 24 hours a day. So you wake up in the morning, the first thing you do, grab your phone, see what messages you might have gotten. But when I say what messages you might have gotten, that could give you the impression that I mean messages from like a wife or a kid or a mom or a dad. And those might be some messages that you're looking for. You might be looking for a message from work. Did someone contact me from work? But usually what you're doing nowadays, and this is just, again, everyone and part of the culture, you're seeing the amount of random technologically based interaction that you got with what would be the equivalent of complete strangers commenting on parts of your personal life from places that you don't know and maybe you've never been.
Mm-hmm.
Nick, that's a little strange, my friend. I got to tell you. And I'll just, again, speak personally. I can see why why many folks are kind of going off the reservation when it comes to a lot of this technology, because of the fact that it is so powerful and pervasive. And I think it's hard for the average person out there to figure out how to use it without it becoming overwhelming in their life. Even something as simple as this, Nick, back 20 years ago, we had to seek out information, news. It wasn't always with us. We would have to seek a newspaper.
And arrange your schedule to access.
Yes, it's going to be on at 6 o'clock tonight if I'd like to see an update on the government or on our president or on the space shuttle or whatever, the economy. I would have to go seek information in a way that's completely different than now. Now, you fast forward 30 or 40 years earlier, there was no television. So the level that you had to go to keep up on current events and activities think about how far you would have to go just to hear about, if the Revolutionary War broke out in France, if France had a Revolutionary War that started, you might not hear about that for days until it circulated across the sea and until you read about it in a publication, in a paper that was printed. Today, if a bomb goes off in Jerusalem and 100 people die, like, you would get an image of that within minutes. You would see the carnage. We're connected to the world in a way that I'm simply saying is different than anything, not just America, but this is happening now around the world. It's different than anyone that's ever lived, any group of humans have ever lived. And I think it's powerful, and I think there are unintended consequences to it. There's also some things about it that are fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
Technology has made our life so much better in so many ways. But all that to say, you're a person that doesn't really has not added that to your life. Conscious choice, is that something you've done on purpose?
Yes. When Facebook was brand new, my wife and I experimented with it. We set up a Facebook page.
Ooh,
and
tell all secrets here. Nick did flirt with social media.
Yeah, well, actually, it's my wife that set one up, but I was interested in it because it looked to me like a great way to stay in touch with family, friends, do fun things, and I agree with you that technology is better than not technology. I mean, it has added a lot to our lives, a lot of potential, but I could see. And I think my wife would agree with this too, that we saw very quickly the dangers and pitfalls of going down that road. And I just happened to be, not everybody has this opportunity. I just happened to be at a point in my life, both personally and professionally, where I could opt in or opt out. I had the choice. A lot of people today don't have the choice. If you want to function in the real world today, you don't. Most people, the vast majority, don't have a choice. I was in a unique position of having a choice, and so for me, I'm not saying this is right for everybody, but for me, I opted out, and I, to this day, don't regret that. I have now, of course, yeah, everybody teases me a little bit here and there because I'm out of the loop on a lot of things, but I feel like for my values in life, it was the right choice for me.
So, Nick, I could and I do enjoy talking about the perils of social media, and indulge me on one more rant. I can't help but be struck by the amount of folks in our society, especially young people, who are living their lives connected to this technology and looking for emotional and societal validation in ways that is very detrimental to them. When you're someone and you're posting photos of yourself with the idea that I want to see how many people will hit that button and say that I look pretty or that I look, strong, and that in some way that's connected to your self-esteem, and that's connected to how you feel about yourself, there's a problem with that, and that's not healthy. But I would say, Nick, another part of that is you're missing some of the greatest content. I mean, forget, the Constitution. Forget, the great works of our past and that, we saw in great European museums. Nick, you're missing out on social media memes. And Nick, there's a part of this world. I think we've put together a small. Matt from our team put together a small collection, just a few memes. Now, do you know what a meme is?
Not really. I mean, I've heard the word, but I'm in the context.
Do you know how to spell meme?
MEMES.
Nope. So that's memes. That would be
okay.
Is memes, that would be plural memes?
Yeah.
Oh, so he was
okay.
correct. So memes is the plural of meme. By the way, what does meme come from? What is the
I mean, it's a psychological term.
M-E-M-E?
Like a meme in itself is just like a societal trend essentially that's been continuing on.
Where did the
But
word come
nowadays
from?
It's more.
To me, it looks
can't
like
hear him
it
well
looks
if you're
like
out there.
Mimi.
Yeah, it does. So again, we've put together. Go ahead and bring those up. Don't look yet. We've put
Oh, okay.
together some memes. We just kind of threw these together. That obviously you, because you're not on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, you're probably not going to know what these are. But we're going to bring them up one at a time.
Okay.
We're going to have you look at them, and then you're going to give me your best guess on what it is and what significance it has. Obviously, you don't know. Just give a guess. Then I'm going to have to explain to you what it actually is.
Uh-huh.
And then we're going to see what's more ridiculous. The fact that you don't know what it is, or that I'm explaining how stupid this is that went to millions and millions and sometimes billions of people. All right, number one.
Where am I looking?
Here we go. This TV here.
Oh, okay.
It's the world record, and there's an egg up there. Take it all in. Tell us what you think.
But I mean, what am I supposed to say? It says world record egg.
Yep. So
What are you looking for? What type of egg it is, or what?
this, I believe that this now is the most viewed and respond. So on obviously on social media, you click on an image, like it, respond, put a comment. So this, no guess. You have no guess on what this is.
Well, it's not a real egg, that's for sure.
How do you know this, Nick?
I can just tell by looking at the picture.
Any other guesses on what makes this egg special?
51 million people have wasted their time.
All right, so Nick, this egg recently came out, and what's interesting is still no one really knows who started it. There's a lot of people that claim it.
Okay.
So a lot of these Instagram influencers, people like the Kardashians and others, held the world record for amount of interactions or likes, comments on images. I think the previous image was by a young woman by the name of Kylie Jenner, who had some image of her, and it had...
Her baby. It was her baby holding her, like, hand or something.
Mhm.
Got, like, I don't know, 50 million likes, I think. Like
Yep.
that, something like
So
that.
again, if you're out there, you can't hear Matt talking, but he's saying that there was a photo that got millions and millions of likes, the most ever, and it was by the Kardashians. But someone put this out, I think 2 weeks ago or recently, and in a few weeks,
51 million.
50 just this image,
Okay.
51 million interactions, likes, comments. So Nick, in the history of America and the history of the world,
Mm-hmm.
this egg represents the apex of our response as humans and as Americans.
Oh, now I know this is
Just take it in,
supposed-
buddy. Just take it in.
Okay, but just a
Because
minute.
there's no. This is the part that's interesting. This is not a joke. This is seriously the most responded to image in the history, maybe, of humans on this earth.
Well, this is my point. I know that this is supposed to be a test of me, but let me turn it for just a moment. Help me understand, because I'm not opposed to everybody having fun and playing games. That's okay, but help me understand why the whole world would be fascinated with that.
So let me give you my opinion on that, and we're going to get a microphone for these guys eventually, so they can chime in as well.
Okay.
But I think that the world record egg, and don't forget to talk into the mic, by the way, when you talk.
Okay.
I think the world record egg, to me, symbolizes a little bit of social media and all the people. It's a community. Social media is a community now. It's like its own country. Like Instagram and Facebook is like its own country, and Instagram is like a good country, and Facebook is like third world. But that's another topic. So, but this to me was like counterculture. It was almost like a people giving the middle finger to all the Instagram influencers as how stupid it is. I actually think that this egg represents. I think when I go back to the conversation I was having right before we pulled this egg up, and I'm like, it's not healthy for you to sleep with your phone next to yourself on your pillow and for you to watch all day at work. The likes come in from your salad that you posted a photo of and like, OMG, eating blue cheese again. It's going to be a great Friday. Like, and you putting that out and you waiting with bated breath nervously to see if complete strangers will hopefully give you a little cyber touch on their device someplace you've never seen before. As ridiculous as that sounded, people out there also know it's ridiculous. I'm telling you, we all know how crazy we are to be interacting with technology, right? Like most people, like 90% of people know that the way technology and social media has like taken over our lives is not healthy. So this egg, in essence, I think, I don't know if the person who put it out meant it to be this way, but it's meant to be kind of a F you to all the social media influencers and those kind of people, because it's like, yeah, we'll put an egg out there and that will be the most popular thing of all time. And then there were follow-up eggs. There was a meme that was created about a movie they were going to make about the egg with Danny DeVito starring as the egg. So so Nick, this is what happens: is you start someplace with the egg, and then the egg takes on different forms in movies, and it just turns into what you could have never imagined. So all right. So Nick did not know what the egg is. All right. So don't look. We're gonna bring up another image here.
All right.
All right. What is this image? For those of you watching live on YouTube, we'll bring this up later on when we edit for the TV show.
All right. I'm not a big NBA person, but I do recognize LeBron James.
All right. Yes.
And,
Nick recognized LeBron James.
Love college basketball, but I'm not an NBA guy. I would assume, I'm just guessing, this is a teammate, and LeBron James is hacked off because the guy did something stupid.
Okay, so that was a good guess, Nick. That was a good guess. But now, what's this up top here? What's this happening up here?
We just left a ref stop. Oh, wait, we just left a ref stop. Why didn't you go? Oh, well, he's just putting a different caption to the action.
Nick, ding, 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 ding.
Yeah.
That's good.
Okay.
So this is the type of meme. This is LeBron James in, I think it was Game 5 or Game 6 of last year's NBA Finals, where J.R. Smith, who was on his team, caught the ball in the fourth quarter with like 5 seconds left, and then just like didn't shoot a layup, like dribbled it back out because he thought they were ahead. J.R. Smith and was trying to run the clock out while they were losing by 1 point. I think that.
Okay.
So then LeBron James famously walks up to him and puts his arms out and says, "What were you thinking?"
Yeah.
And so then other people take this image and put all kinds of different quotes up. So
It's like a personalized, like this is the general kind of like attitude and like response that you're relating to, and then this is more of like a qualifier. You know what I mean? Like people will swap out this quote.
Well, that's not really a modern technology thing. That goes back to my childhood. People would do things like that.
So this is the famous LeBron James, J.R. Smith, and people will put, any numerous things up there to espouse to someone else that they don't understand what the hell that person was thinking. All right, next one up. All right, what do we have here? Let's see if you can.
6 the same height.
All right, so,
I have no earthly idea.
all right, so I'm gonna explain this to you. So this is a new concept. I don't know how to fully. I'm gonna do my best to explain it, but basically, this is a photo of Henry Cavill, right? Is that Henry Cavill? The guy who played Superman in the recent DC adaptions of Superman and the Justice League. And this is the guy that played Aquaman. What is his name again? Jason Momoa. So this is him just sneaking up behind this guy at some Oscars or some awards ceremony to like bear hug him. So just a cool snapshot that someone got of these two friends and him sneaking up. So now what someone does is they put any thought that they have of, so this one says, a woman with the same height and hair as my mom. This is someone who put that, 6-year-old me. So it's any kind of, I'm going to come and disrupt and cause trouble or ruckus or...
I can actually see that. That could be fun. Yeah.
Yeah, it's more like meant to kind of like make you more be able to relate to it personally. You know what I mean? Like you can imagine, like when you're a young kid running up to your mom and being like, "Oh wait, that's not my mom." You know what I mean? And like trying to scare her, but like, so it's just like it's pretty niche meme, honestly, kind of.
I got an input. There are a lot of meme formats.
Yeah.
That's
This is like a general format, kind of. Like
It's true.
The underlying image is the format, and then these are what you would change to more personalize the image. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yep. All right. Next, I think we have a couple more left. This is the last one, I think. Oh, no, 2 more. So what do you think this is?
The picture or the whole
The whole thing,
The
buddy.
whole thing. They did surgery on a grape. That is all. I don't know what that is all would mean, but
So this one's kind of difficult because it actually doesn't really mean anything. That's
I'm just trying to figure out what's in the picture. I guess those are little claws or something,
Those are
electronic
yeah,
claws,
like
that
Like surgeon.
surgeons, grippers or something. Yeah.
It's like an odd.
It's
Like
a robot.
Yeah, it's like a machine that a surgeon controls to do super like sensitive surgery.
they were practicing surgery on a grape skin.
Yeah.
And so there's nothing about that that's special. And then they did a Danny DeVito one with Danny DeVito starring as the grape. And so Danny DeVito gets often, anytime there's a round object, Danny DeVito is then cast as the fictional future movie of that. So, all right, last but not least.
Look what we can do kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Last but not least. Oh, this is another one of those. Let's go to the next one.
I can't read. You have.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Let's go to this one.
Okay. What if we launch my?
You know who that is?
Oh, that's Bezos. Is it? his
Oh,
name?
it's close. Elon Musk.
Musk. Okay, I'm sorry. It seems like I heard something about this. He smoked dope on the show or something.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah,
good
yeah.
job, Nick.
Some things from social media leak through into mainstream, and you pick up on it. It's not that you really focus on it; you just kind of hear
That's
it.
a good point. Like,
Yeah.
like sometimes social media has such a response that traditional media will pick it up. This is Elon Musk was on a famous podcast, probably the most famous podcast now, called the Joe Rogan Experience. Elon Musk, founder, president of Tesla and SpaceX, went on the show. Fascinating interview. I listened to it. The guy's just wild. And Joe Rogan, they're in California where it's legal. Joe Rogan just busts out marijuana and says, "Hey, man, let's smoke some weed." And Elon Musk is like, "Cool." So that was, the camera caught him taking one. He took one puff of it and made that face. And now this is how people know Elon Musk forever.
Yeah.
Forever. Elon Musk will never, ever, ever be anything but this image. And so, all right, Nick did a good job. Yay. We're giving a round of applause.
What'd I get? 1 out of 5.
Nick, but more importantly, you got the essence of it. Right, so I'm reaching down to get a piece of paper.
The more personalization of it is kind of just like an extension of it. It's like what we like. These are like new memes. Like the formats are already kind of established.
Yeah.
And then this is like what people today are like doing with it. And these are kind of like general ones.
Let me inject something here because
Go ahead, buddy.
This is one of the reasons I chose not to get too involved in this. Again, there's nothing wrong with good, clean, in my mind, good, clean fun, and pop culture can be a lot of fun. I certainly did it when I was a young person. I loved the Beatles and all the things that were going on in my era. But as you get older, your life doesn't get broader, it gets narrower. It's just the nature of life. And you begin to focus more. You can do anything you want, but you can't do everything. And you start focusing. And this is a very time-consuming pursuit. Things like this, keeping up with all of this and responding to all of this, very time-consuming. It can eat your life away. And there's just other things at this point in my life that are more important to me.
Yeah.
So
I've used social media. I have such a love-hate relationship with social media. I mean, obviously, we have Change Everything Live that we've started recently that will have me putting out lots of content on social media now through the show and through things that you and I work on. Nick is one of the folks that puts together a lot of the content here. He's the head of our product division and helps create a lot of the content that you guys see and you will see soon. So it's a little weird because in 2019, I'll probably be more prolific in communicating on social media with content than I've ever been in my entire life. But I would tell you, I've really gotten to a place where I completely agree with you and agree in probably even a deeper sense that I've worked on social media. I've had social media be a part of my life at different times to where I can relate to that person I'm talking about, that you get in this pattern where you're putting content out on social media and you have to wonder whether what you're doing is healthy or not healthy for you. I don't really get into good and bad too much as I get into healthy or unhealthy. And I sat down one day and I said to myself, has this now become this part of my life that's time consuming, that takes away from other parts of my life, even if I don't realize it, and it's diminishing. It's like you just said a minute ago, there's only so many people in your life that you can have intimate, close relationships with. I think most behavioral, societal psychologists say that, is it 12, 15 people that you can really have close relationships with? You can have kind of a loose relationship with like 40 to 60 people, and that you can only really know 150, 120, depending on, certain attributes of your personality. But anything beyond really that range of a small village, like we were talking about earlier, we grew up agrarian in these small villages of people, and your whole world was 120 people, of which a handful of those folks were your family and friends that you knew intimately. And that's really all that you could manage and still be connected in a healthy way, not just to those people, but to yourself and your own thoughts. Buddy, I've been in a place in my life where I've noticed that using technology, using these social media platforms, where I'm putting out content and I'm putting it out for the wrong reasons. I'm putting it out there because I want to get that interaction from people that I don't know or that I do know. But I'll tell you, these technologies are created to be used in that way. And so at this point in my life, I probably have shied away from that. I'm probably going down the Nick Henry road in a sense, where I don't really post my personal life, or I don't post much on these social platforms. And I got to tell you, this sounds almost to some people strange, but when I completely for a season went cold turkey on social media, it's like my thoughts became clearer. It's like I had clarity in a way that was different when, to your point, I made my world smaller. I don't necessarily think the social media was bad. It was just so much to keep up with that it diminished and it watered down other parts of my thoughts and people that I should be focused on. Does that make sense? Like, there's only so much bandwidth your mind has. There's only so much bandwidth your emotions have. And I think these social platforms and technology can put you in a position where you're so watered down with information and connectivity, it's hard to connect to the things that are important.
Yeah. There's times when you want to communicate with the masses, definitely, but you don't want to live your life in front of the masses.
That's a good way of looking at it.
Yeah.
And it's okay to communicate to the masses, but you don't want to live your real life in front of them. That's an excellent way of articulating it.
And I think a second principle that would apply here is that you should never allow anybody. This is just a basic principle of life. You should never allow anybody to pour into your life who has not invested in your life.
That's a good point.
So when you open your life up for criticism from anybody and everybody who has never invested anything in you, you're asking to be destroyed. You are.
Yep. And again, you know, the whole the whole dynamic of social media to where, you know, you would go on Facebook. I freaking despise Facebook. Like, despise it. Like, you go on Facebook and you would, let's say, put a photo up of your lunch. Just had lunch at Burger King, and you know, the bacon cheeseburger was better than ever. So I put that up there, right? And then 19 people are like, why'd you go to Burger King? Burger King hates everybody. You eat bacon? Bacon is evil. And those are capitalists that run Burger King. And you're like, so all of a sudden, my little simple bacon cheeseburger is now the fodder for conversation amongst the whole world, whether it's right or wrong. To your point, I'm not quite sure that living in connectivity to everyone's opinion, especially people that don't know you. I'm fascinated by the amount of input that we have in each other's lives now through technology, through folks that don't know you, have no idea really intimately about the situation you might be in. It's like random input into our lives from random people is now an accepted form of communication. And I just think it's not something I'm interested in. Again, for some people that they might enjoy that, but more than anything, I just want to come back to my original point. I think technology and social media is powerful in a way that we are only beginning to understand. And I think ultimately, back to the power of the individual, anything that takes away from your ability to find who you are in your heart, your mind, and your spirit, anything that separates you from the most important people in your world, and anything that dilutes your ability to become the person that you're trying to be in a journey to do what it is you're on this planet to do, anything that stops you, dilutes you, challenges that, stands in front of that, is a negative part of your life. And so I think there's going to be a big change in our society. I hope there's a big change on how we learn to use these technologies in a way that that each person has to figure out for themselves, but enhances our lives and doesn't diminish our life. But Nick, again, you've made a choice that makes your experience interesting. Is there anything that you miss not being on Connected, or is it harder to get news? Do you watch regular news?
That's an interesting question. It might be harder, but news is, and remember, I've been to journalism school, so news is more than just something I see. News is, I don't even know if that's the right word for what we do now. News is a building is on fire, and you take a picture and show somebody that a building is on fire. We don't do that anymore. We now, if there's a building on fire, we're arguing about, we're blaming people for starting it before we even know who started it, and we're philosophizing on the pros and cons of fire, and what is called news now is more opinion and insights and ideology. And so when you say how do you get your news, I would, that's another reason I'm fearful.
Do you still read the paper?
Occasionally.
Okay.
But print is kind of, if I want to read, I'd go online.
Okay.
Yeah, if I want to read, I'd go online. But I'm not just going to open up for that to be fed to me. Because, again, let's go back to the principle I shared a moment ago about not just opening your life up for people to pour in. You want to know who's pouring into your life. You want to know who is speaking to you. There's no more greater power on earth than words. words are the greatest power on earth. That's one reason I went into journalism. Every war that has ever been fought in human history was not won with guns and bombs and bayonets. It was won or lost with words. Words have shaped nations, the destiny of kings. They're the most powerful thing in the world. They either impart life or death. They either impart wisdom or stupidity. And you have got to be aware not just of the words, but who is feeding them into you. And that's another reason that I was not keen on social media early on, because a lot of this comes at you and you have no idea where it's coming from. And until you know that there's not an agenda behind it and that it is objective, to me, it's not really news.
Gotcha.
To me, news is either completely objective or it's a fair presentation of both sides of an argument. Does that make sense?
Total sense. Yeah, and again, I think it goes back to the connectivity and the power of the technology we use. So we have these traditional media outlets. They every day put out what is or was news. Now you have various television stations that pick that news up and report their own news, and then report various stages of commentary, opinion, satire. Then the internet picks it up, and there are people that are online journalists that put their version of it out. Then people comment on that, and sometimes the comments often become news. And so, yeah, it's very difficult to decipher for the average person out there what is news and what is worthy of consumption or not. Well, Nick, thanks for coming on. We're gonna wrap this up. Nick's gonna be, for those of you out there who check out the broadcast, Nick's gonna be a regular contributor. Nick and I are working on a lot of really cool ideas that we're gonna be putting out in written form, probably starting about 90 days from now. And we'll probably, as we roll out these different topics, Nick and I are working on probably 4, 5, 6 big ideas, things that really we feel like can impact someone's life. You know, we spend a lot of time, Nick and I, talking about, Nick being my writing partner, you know, what is it that the average person out there, what could really impact their life? You know, if I think about the opposite of the gobbledygook avalanche of trash that people get on social media and being connected to technology, everything we've just said is that it's this overwhelming ocean tsunami of negative or unproductive content from strangers that you don't trust, that haven't invested in you, that doesn't necessarily take you anywhere, but every now and then is funny as hell. So that's kind of what the internet is. But what Nick and I are gonna, what Nick and I seek to put together, and I'm excited about this, is through Change Everything Live and through the Change Everything social innovation work, self-development programs we're working on. Nick and I and our team here, we want to work on content both in this TV show and online and using social media that we think can impact you as an individual and speak to you, speak to your life, help empower you to be someone who figures out how to change yourself and then ultimately figures out how to change the world. Nick, I've done enough work in social innovation. I'm 42 years old, and I've worked on issues like poverty and homelessness, and you know, we now work. We're doing a lot of work on the opioid crisis, et cetera. But you know, I meet a lot of people who come to me and they say, you know, Andrae, you know, I want to change the world. I you know, want to be this great person that makes an impact on the world. I will tell you this, as someone who has desired to do that myself, sometimes I've been successful, sometimes I've struggled. Ultimately, you will never change anything in the world around you, whether that's your community, whether that's your family, whether that's the entire world we live in as humans. You'll never change anything if you don't first start by changing yourself. Yep. So change everything, self-improvement, self-development, as we've been working on it, Nick, it's going to seek to challenge people to change themselves and then change the world. and then help people change the world. So if you're out there, we're excited about the ability to work on topics. We're working on things like how to gain perspective. We were talking earlier, today on the show about Hamilton and how the founding fathers or folks that lived in this country maybe a few years ago, the hard work, the dedication, the grit, the tenacity, the adversity that they had to have, it's different than it is today. And I know that's controversial. I know all of us want to live, all of us in our own minds want to believe that all of our adversity today is the same as it was 20 years ago and 50 years ago and 500 years ago. It's just not true. The truth of the matter is that we all experience challenges differently, and I will tell you that I think perspective and understanding that here in America, in our society, Nick, your phone's ringing, just by the way. So it's the bill collectors. So, but I think it's one of the topics we're talking about is just the idea that understanding the world, having the right perspective on the world around you. And I think we talked about it this way. In our society, we have a lot of opportunity, but someone paid the price for that opportunity. Yeah. Somebody sacrificed for that opportunity. And when you live in modern day America, and with a lot of challenges, things aren't perfect, but if you live in our society and all you see is woe is me, and all you feel like is that everyone's not fair to you and life isn't fair to you, then I think there's something, I'm not trying to pick on people who think that way, but I think it's inherently something unhealthy about that, and it's going to set you up for failure.
Yeah.
So,
well, not only do we live in a society like that, we live in a society like that where a lot of people have learned to manipulate that mindset to their own benefit.
It's true.
And that's what's truly sad.
Yep. So Nick and I are working on some content on perspective that we're going to put out. We're also working on, things as simple as, how to achieve success and how to achieve significance. Nick, I think the two forces, you and I always say this, the two forces that shaped America more than any other forces being philosophies, ideas. The two biggest ideas that shaped America were capitalism and Christianity, or Judeo-Christian values and beliefs. The people that came over here before Hamilton and during Hamilton's time, they were driven by the idea that this was a land of opportunity and that they were going to have a tremendous chance of getting wealth and of being very much filled with resources for them and their family. So that capitalism and that idea that financial success could come, that drove a lot of people that came here. And what also drove a lot of people that came here was the idea that religious freedom and people coming here to, if you read a lot of the puritanical writings, those folks believed that this land was going to be the promised land, if you will. And so capitalism and religion were the two forces that shaped America. And so, what forces, I think of it this way. We still live in a society where the average person who's in high school or in college today, they have a plan, I would say, for success. If I stood and I was at the commencement at the college down the road, and I looked into the crowd and all the tassels were hanging from the students who had just graduated, and I said, show me your written out plan to be successful, to be financially successful, to have success in your career. I guarantee you most of those kids could show me something in some form or another of how they've thought about and are working towards financial success. And that comes from capitalism. That comes from that idea of being financially successful as a important part of you as a person and as your role in society and in your family. That's where that comes from, and I think it's driven our success. And I don't think it's a bad thing. I don't think trying to be successful financially is a bad thing. But I'll tell you this: if you have a plan to be financially successful, but you do not have a plan to have significance in your life, to do something of value and meaning beyond just money, you are going to get to the end of your life and you are going to be tremendously miserable. And so we're going to talk about that. We're going to help try to connect people, not just to financial success. By the way, be financially successful. Get rich. It's awesome. Like Fiddy said, get rich. Don't die trying. Okay. And see, Nick doesn't know who that is. Nick doesn't know who 50 Cent is. But I'm all about people getting rich. But I'm telling you, Nick, I've met so many people in my life who are rich and freaking miserable. People who they bought into the idea. They had their plan to be successful. Their parents pushed them. You got to be a doctor. You got to be a lawyer. You got to be an investor. You got to carry on the family name through wealth. Listen, those are great things. But I've met so many people, Nick, at the end of their lives who they have wealth, they have money, they have power of some sort that's rooted in our society, but they never did anything for others in a way that left a huge gaping hole in their heart and in their spirit. And I think people are hungry for that. I meet people nowadays, Nick, and I tell you this, it's 2019. People are waking up to the idea that if you tell them money is the answer to all their problems, I think people are waking up to the fact that that's not true, man. They've seen enough of their parents. They've seen enough of the folks that have come before them that said that was what happiness was. And they saw how freaking miserable those people's lives really were. Like, oh, you got all that money. You told me this was what success was, mom and dad. And look at you. You have exactly what you told me I should have, and you're the most miserable freaking people I've ever met in my life behind closed doors. So I think people, Nick, as we venture out forward, I think you'd be surprised. I think you'd be surprised how many people are hungry for someone to just speak into their life in some productive way. Hard to do that one-on-one at times, but I think this TV show and I think some of the products and the social media content distribution we're working on, but I think there's a lot of people out there who they're wandering through a desert in their life, and they know for a fact that chasing money doesn't work, but they don't quite know what the alternative is and what does work. And I think you are, and the team we have here, I think we can do a lot to throw out some life concepts that can work.
I agree. It's and there's no teacher like experience, and there's no teacher like failure. So through the course of your life, you learn what is valuable. Money's a great tool, but it can never love you back if you love it. It's what you choose to do with it, how you earn it, and what you do with it is what matters.
Yep. So again, if you're out there, you're gonna hear a lot more from Nick. We'll have a lot more memes that Nick will have to decipher. And so again, Change Everything Live. Check out the entirety of the broadcast if you're seeing this on television, on YouTube, or on Apple iTunes, or transcribed on Papyrus at your... No, I'm kidding. We don't do that. So thank you so much, Nick. Good seeing you. We'll talk to you again soon. Have a great day.
Thank you.